from Joshua chapter 4 and God's words to his people. Hear the word of the Lord. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. Amen. We come to a very important aspect of why the university exists, at least why the university used to exist, and we'll get to why that might have changed. But the emphasis on significance and meaning is huge for us. So to begin, I actually had a student come up to me this last semester at the end of a class, and she said exactly this. You seem like the kind of professor who could answer this question. What is the purpose of life? Young people are really serious about what it is that they see in life around them and what they don't see. And quite frankly, in her case, it was what she wasn't seeing, which was a sadness. But I began by saying, you're asking me. And so I have to be upfront with you right away and say, I am a believer in Jesus as Lord, and I'm a Christian. And so that's going to make a difference in how I answer this question. You're going to have different answers from different professors. I want you to know this is going to be mine. She smiled, shook her head up and down, and for 45 minutes we talked. And at the end of our conversation, she said what I think everybody feels and thinks, and that is this: I want my life to count for something. In essence, this is what we all want. And so this last week, I was actually talking with a faculty member who said these words. In a conversation, she said, after earning my PhD, I achieved not one but 2 federal grants, secured a postdoc position, gained a tenured university position, and thought, now I've arrived. But it was never enough. I had to have more. There was always something else missing. Wow. And let me speak directly to the students, because students have to hear this too. Let me be very direct and say, if you have heard these words, they are not true from a Hebraic Christian point of view. And here they are. I go to school to get good grades, to go to a good college, to get a good job, to make good money, to have a good life. That is not a Christian point of view. Just as we all discovered that there's something missing in our lives, nothing is different than the university. You see this here as an example of a university professor who said as much. I was in a conversation with another individual, a student. They were talking about their psychology degree. They were moving in that direction for their life and their work. And I said, do you ever ask questions like, why are we here? I mean, isn't that the essence of what it means to be human? Shouldn't that be a baseline question for a psych degree? And her response was, no. We only studied data and polling and quantification by numbers. May I just take off my glasses for a moment and preach just for 30 seconds? If you lose the humanities, you lose what it means to be human. And the only way that you're going to understand what it means to be human is to understand a biblical viewpoint. All right. There's your little preachment for the day. It is of essence for us to consider the great questions of life. I mean, if you're taking a psych degree or any kind of degree, these are the questions that you ought to be asking. What's real? Is there a God? If there is one, what do I do with him or her or it? What do I think about myself as a human person? Where do my ethics come from? What do I think about knowledge? How about history? And what happens after life? Wow, those are the deep questions that ought to be asked in every single degree program ever. When I was teaching in high school, I used to do this as a project-based idea. I would send my students to college campuses, and I would ask them to ask college students on the college campus to answer questions like, who do they think Jesus is, and what is truth, and a few questions like this. And they would take a video camera. Of course, it's all changed now. You know, we don't take the big honkin' video camera anymore. We just take our phones to do this. Technology changes, but the questions don't. And the idea, of course, was that they come back, report to the class, give an oral report, maybe give us a snippet of whatever video they had for us. This particular report will always stay in my mind. Here was this group of 3 or 4 students. The young woman who was the head of the group said, "This is what I think of when I went to the college campus." And one of the other persons in the group held up a picture similar to the one that's on the screen. If you know nothing of Escher paintings, Escher was basically somebody who painted stairways in all these different directions that had no beginning and no end. And she said, "This is what I heard on the college campus. I heard answers that had no beginning and no end. There was no substance, there was no origin, there was no outcome, there was no source from which any of these things came." And I'm going to say to you that nothing has changed on the university campus. We still have people who are without an understanding of the source and origin of where they come from, which, of course, leads us to this important topic of discussion. And these are the 5 questions, and you're going to see them repeated all the way through this session. What matters? Where do I look? Where does my life count? Who decides that? And what am I going to do now? Those are the 5 questions. When we talk about meaning, I've suggested here some definitions of the word meaning. It means significance, going back to that quote that I gave you as we began. I want my life to count for something. I want to know that I have worth, dignity, and value as a human person. I want to know that there's a reason for my existence and that there's a purpose for my life. These are things that are essential to every human person and essential to university education, which we don't always see at the university. What we see is not people searching for these questions, but people being told what the answers are instead of helping them to understand that these are questions they have to ask. So I can't go through any session without talking about movies, and I would like to suggest this one. This is from 2002, Jack Nicholson, in a movie called About Schmidt. And he said exactly this in the movie: I want my life to count for something. His wife had just died. He was kind of wandering around trying to find friends and connect with people and his job, and he had just retired. All of these kinds of things were happening all at once. So he decides that he is going to begin to do something good, and he realizes that there's something like a Compassion International out there, and so he starts sending letters to this young man named Ndugu. And Schmidt tells Ndugu all about his life and about all the awfulnesses of his life. And you'll get why I'm laughing in just a second. So he takes himself on a cruise in his RV. He buys an RV and he says, I'm going to travel the country and see if I can find an answer to the question of what gives my life significance and why my life should count for anything anyway. And so he realizes that if he doesn't understand these things, if he comes to the end of his life and doesn't get this, that you'll notice the last phrase here on the screen, eventually it will be as if he has never existed at all. And that was the quandary he was in. And so, at the end of the film, I'm giving you the spoiler alert. I am telling you the end of the movie. He comes home after this big RV trip, has a huge pile of mail that's accumulated, sees one personal letter, pulls it out, opens it up, and it's from the person who is caring for Ndugu, who says, Ndugu is only 6 years old. He doesn't understand what you're writing about. He can't read your language, but he's very grateful for your financial support. And oh, by the way, he sent you a drawing of himself and you. And at that point in the movie, Warren Schmidt breaks down in a torrent of tears, realizing that perhaps, just maybe, this might have been what his life counted for. I'm telling you, everybody goes through this. Everybody wants to know the answer to that question. What does my life count for? Well, I'm just going to give you a snapshot of what our life counts for. So Robin and I, my wife and I, have been teachers, combined between the two of us over 65 years in the classroom, in one form or another. Robin usually in elementary ed, second grade teacher, and I've been in high school through PhD courses. To us, this little piece really is the substance of what our lives are about. I'll read it to you if you can't see it. The title of it is What Matters. This has been in our home for some time. 100 years from now, it will not matter what kind of car I drove, what kind of house I lived in, how much I had in my bank account, nor what my clothes looked like. But the world may be a little better because I was important in the life of a child. And I would just like to go on to say that every doctor, lawyer, and business person that ever hears what I have to say ought to thank Jesus for every second grade teacher who taught them how to read. And if you have not gone back to your second grade teacher to thank them, please do so. Thank teachers for what they've done. Oh, wait, is this Teacher Appreciation Week? Yeah, by the way, it is. This coming week. Go do that. Now, don't be scared by this next picture, okay? Especially those of you who are older. All of the teenagers in this group right now can't wait to see what's going to happen here. This is Metallica. And for those of you who are not sure why in the world Mark would show Metallica on a Sunday morning when he's teaching, I would tell you this, that students in my classes come with Metallica t-shirts in 2023. Now, the thing to know about Metallica is that it's a heavy metal rock band, and, you know, they're quite loud. And the look on this guy's face, the lead singer, of course, kind of gives you the general sense of things, I suspect. But the key to this, the key to what I'm about to suggest, is the name of the album, that is Metallica, and the title of the song, Nothing Else Matters. Now, what's really fascinating about this is that this song was actually written by one of the band members to his girlfriend. And it became a ballad for this heavy metal rock band. And the rockers out there, when it first came out in 91, they hated it. But you know, it's actually taken on a life of its own. It has become the anthem for every secular humanist around. For everybody who says these kinds of words, forever trusting who we are, nothing else matters. Never open myself up this way, life is ours, we live it our way. All these words I don't just say and nothing else matters. Never cared for what they say, play, what they do, or what they know. This song has taken on monumental impact in the culture generally over the last few decades since it was first sung. It has become the song for everybody who thinks, I'm going to do it my way. Now, of course, for those of you who are older and remember Frank Sinatra, of course, you're all shaking your head, smiling, going, yeah, I did it my way. You know what? If I haven't said this about 10 times in all the years I've been teaching here, let me say it again. Ever since Genesis 3, we have been doing this. Nothing is new. Nothing is new. So, let me introduce you to some poetry. For those of you who are not sure, this is a tapping from the movie Prometheus by Mr. Scott, a great film, but one that actually carries his worldview to its conclusion, an evolutionary point of view. These are poems that I would read with my students in high school. So here's one by E.E. Cummings, Pity this busy monster, man unkind not. In other words, don't pity him because he's bringing it on himself. That was the whole point of this particular poem. How about this, for those who would like to go backwards in time, to Shakespeare. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. We would read that whole scene together. And then, my favorite, still one of my favorite authors of all time, Edgar Allan Poe. Out, out are the lights, out all, and over each quivering form the curtain of funeral pall comes down with the rush of a storm, while the angels, all pallid and wan, uprising, unveiling, affirm that the play is the tragedy man and its hero, the conqueror worm. Perhaps you've heard people say, we're going to be nothing but worm food. Well, that's basically what Poe is saying. This is the end. Your life, you think it has meaning, you think it has significance. You talk to Cummings, you talk to Shakespeare, you talk to Poe. No way. You do not have meaning, you do not have significance, and when you're gone, you're gone. Your light is out, the candle has been blown out, and you are done. End of story. You matter not. I hope that you don't have that kind of view of the world, especially since you're sitting here and listening to these kinds of teachings this morning, because this is where we need to come back to. What does meaning mean? It means that we do have significance. We do have worth, value, and dignity. We do have a reason for life. We do have a purpose that's been God-given. And we do have answers to these questions. What matters? Where do I look? Does my life count? Who decides? And what am I going to do now? So in light of that, again, back to the university needs to be asking the big questions. That's what it should be doing. It doesn't always do this. We have really fallen in the university into the quantifiable, data-driven universe of all knowledge is in little zeros and ones. And that's not true. So from our vantage point, the big questions about things like meaning and purpose and reason for life, we have to help students to understand the answer to that question. Why do I exist? Why does my life have meaning, if it does at all? Because people are asking those questions. This is why the university is supposed to exist, that it might provide some kind of meaning. Now, some of you probably know who this is. His name is Simon Sinek. You've probably read a book or two of his if you're in business at all, because he's become a big name. Well, you know what? He became a big name in 2009 in his TED Talk, which I think was over in Washington State. And he was giving this great presentation. It's been shown over 30 million times on YouTube. And he addresses the question in business about what's most important when you advertise. And he says, when you advertise, it's not the how, it's not the what, it's the why. If you don't know why you are selling what you're selling, then you are not going to sell anything. And that really, this TED Talk in 2009 literally launched his career. Now, I am going to make a very clear pronouncement here that not only Simon Sinek, but anybody who speaks truth is stealing from Moses. They got their stuff from Moses. They might not even know what the Pentateuch means, the first 5 books of the Bible, but they got it from there in some way, unconsciously, through some teaching over the years. Why is that? Because this is exactly what Moses said. At least 5 times in the Pentateuch, Exodus 12, Deuteronomy 3 times, Joshua chapter 4. Moses said, when your children ask why, you are to say. Why is the great question of all of life. Why is the most important question of life. Why gives us meaning and purpose and reason. Moses said it first, not Simon Sinek. So, let's just take a snapshot of one of these places. And I've chosen Joshua chapter 4. I began with a prayer this morning, reading those verses at the end of Joshua chapter 4. Check this out. So, Joshua chapter 4 is just before the people cross over into the Promised Land. And here's the Jordan River. And God miraculously stops the Jordan River so that they can cross on dry ground. This is like ditto of the Red Sea event, if you recall, from the book of Exodus. So they're walking across on dry ground across the Jordan River. And in order to memorialize this great event, they put a big pile of rocks on the shoreline. Now, if you're not familiar with Hebraic thinking, rocks matter. So they're actually called in some places like Ireland, for instance, they'll call it the cairn. And the cairn is this little, well, I'll just go backwards and show you. It's this thing. The cairn is when you establish this little rock pile. And it's there for a purpose, for whatever purpose it is that you've just set this pile of rocks up. That's what we're talking about here, this memory, this memorial to something that has gone past. And so The great question that Moses offers is, okay, when your children ask you, why is there a pile of rocks down by the river, you are to say to them. Now, you'll notice here I've enumerated all of the observations. The question is, why are there stones? Who asks the children does? Who answers the parents? What event occurred crossing the Jordan, and what action was taken? There was a memorial established for the remembrance of this. Now, there are a number of really cool things that took place here within the Hebrew language, and I'll just kind of give you a flyover understanding of this. In 4:6, Joshua 4:6, the word sign is used. It means literally a historical marker. You've seen these, right? You're going down some back road someplace, and there's this sign by the side of the road, and some of us actually stop and look at them because we are interested in the history of it. And so we stop and we look at this historic marker, and it says, oh, something happened here, or so-and-so built a house, or this event took place, whatever the case might be. It was a historic marker for the Israelites. It was pointing back to an event, just like the historic markers do on the side of a road today. It literally was the billboard saying, look, this is the reason why this is here. The second important word that's mentioned is in 4:7, which uses the word memorial, which means literally that you're supposed to stop and reflect on what you're seeing. You don't just stop, read it, and go on with life. You're supposed to stop and consider it, ponder it, thoughtfully consider what it is this might have for you. It means to pay attention. It literally means that it's a planned event, by the way, when your children ask you. That means you've got to be ready ahead of time. And in education, we call this curricula. Curricula means all of the stuff that you're supposed to study. Well, this is one of the things you ought to study, is the meaning, purpose, and significance of life. And so there is an action-based idea. You build a pile of rocks. There's an audibility to it. That is, you're actually asking and answering questions here. There's a physicality to it. There's a Q&A. There's stories involved, visual aids. I mean, how much more elementary ed can we get? This is project-based learning at its finest right here. This is what it means to actually understand why I matter. So, I read those last verses to us for this purpose, for this slide. Joshua 4:24, why, asking why matters. He did this, Yahweh did this, so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Very direct, straightforward. At the end of this chapter, this is the reason why matters. The answer is given. So what does that matter for the university? I'm going to suggest to you, and we'll get more into this next week, the title of next week's session is going to be, if you can't afford a worldview, one will be given to you. Thank you for those of you who are chuckling and smiling. There are 5 words here that I would like to suggest. One is that when you go to university, you're going to be forming your beliefs. Now, I realize that you're in high school right now, perhaps, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I just can't wait to get out of high school and to go to college. Well, guess what? All of the stuff that you learned in high school is going to be advantageous to you in university. However, the most advantageous aspect of your life through the first 18 years is going to be this place, the church, and the impact of your parents on your lives, because you are forming beliefs. Notice the last one under instruction, because the professors you hear, they're going to be teaching you things. And it's not just simply factual evidence of some equation form that you learn in calculus class. It's going to be their interpretation of the world around them. And they'll be teaching you that. And that will be your instruction. And you will be making choices based upon whether or not you think that prof is right or wrong. And by the way, please don't ever forget, I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, when you go to university, you're going to see all these people with PhDs and all these big regalia and super serious writing, and it's all great, and I love it myself. But don't ever forget, just because somebody knows more than you doesn't make them right. And just because it's a professor at university doesn't make them better than your high school teachers. Thank you very much. All right, I guess that was another preachment there, wasn't it? I guess so. So you're going to be making choices in life. You're going to be planning. You're going to be making decisions. All of this matters. The institution that you attend at university is going to do every single one of these ideas. And the only question left to answer is, are you going to allow the university to hold sway in your decision making, or are you going to allow a Hebraic biblical view to actually come through your thought processes as a young Christian at university? And I would be quick to add, once again, I am not suggesting that the university is bad or wrong. I teach there. I think it's a cool place. Just remember that just because you hear it there doesn't make it gospel. I think we only have one of those. All right, once again, same slide: significance, worth, purpose, reason. What does it matter? Why am I here? Why should I think about these kinds of things? A few years ago, back in 2014 actually, I taught a course here. It was the second course I taught. The first course was actually on movies. I remember Keith came to me and said, we would like you to teach our people how to watch movies. That was in 2013. And then in 2014, I did this: vocation is ministry. And by the way, I'm going to repeat that this coming fall, Lord willing. So that will be a repetitious thing. And one of the reasons why we want to repeat it is because it wasn't ever taped, and we want to make sure that people have it available. So why is why important? It gets you out of bed in the morning. I mean, bottom line, there it is. This is the reason why is important, because it motivates us. So you've probably seen this guy before. There are 3 questions that I tell my students that they ought to be asking themselves every single time they hear me teach. So what? Who cares? Why should I listen to you today? And if I can't answer those 3 questions, I haven't done my job. And I would be quick to say, by the way, that every single person who teaches, every single person who leads a business, every single governmental official, I could go down the line, if they can't answer these 3 questions, oh my. So we come back to this. I've been showing this every week. I hope you've noticed that. This is the slide. So the twin Christian pillars actually answer the why question. It gives us the meaning, the worth, significance for life. Because we have an authority, a special revelation, the Word of God, and we have a view of humanity that sees the tension between the dignity and depravity of our human nature. There is natural law, the creational law, and we have authorial intent. Both of those things are really important to us when we think about the university. Now you'll notice, of course, again, the university doesn't teach that. It literally flips it on its head. The university says humans are going to be the final authority, and we are going to recreate the world in the way we want it to be. And we see that happening all around us all the time. I mention it probably every week, but sexual identity is probably the biggest example of what we see consistently. So, I've used the 3 words that we've talked about so far in these first 3 sessions: cohesive, permanent, meaningful choices. We come back to the same slide again. Why? Because we have to understand this basic truth. Purposelessness is time plus chance plus an impersonal force. Or if you're watching any kind of streaming show these days, it's the universe. Have you noticed this? This really ticks us both off, Robin and I. The universe thinks. The universe doesn't say anything. Thank you very much. Who do these people in Hollywood think they are anyway, telling us that the universe does something? That's purposelessness, and it's an impersonal force. It doesn't exist. Or you can have purposefulness, which is plan plus power plus a personal God who makes it happen. Those are your options. And of course, we find all of this in the book of Ecclesiastes. That's the whole point, and one of the reasons why it's my favorite book. We come back to this slide again, and I highlight the same idea because you have to understand your source and your end. You have to understand the origin and the outcome of whatever it is that you're studying, and why it is that your professor will highlight justice or care for the earth or peace. Where does that come from? If it comes from us, if it comes from a human-based belief system, then who's to say mine is right and yours is wrong? I don't know if I said this in this session or not, or one of these sessions or not, but in one of my classes, just a month or 2 ago, we were discussing the issue of definition and why definition is so important when you're writing and communicating. And we were talking about different kinds of words that need definition, and somebody mentioned the word love. And I said, well, this is very important. Here's an example of this. I said, now, where you think the source of love comes from, its origin, is very important at this point, because there are pedophiles who believe that they are also loving, and that what they do is an act of love. You should have seen the expressions on my students' faces. I teach in public university, but their expressions were shock. They couldn't believe, first of all, that a professor would actually talk about such things, nor could they believe that somebody would actually show the outcome of the source, the human-centered source of a belief system that says, yes, you can do whatever you want to a child. But, I mean, that's the end of the discussion. These are the kinds of things that we need to be addressing and thinking about, because if we don't, we're just going to be led by the nose to whoever says their truth the next time we sit in the classroom. And then, of course, we come back to Genesis. There's nothing new about this. I've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks as well. That transcendence in the personal God and the eternal nature of God and all of these things gives us all of the answers to those great questions. What's real if there is a God? Who are we as human beings? Where does our knowledge come from? And so on. But here is the key. And this actually was something I taught last semester in our course that we taught here in those sessions last semester. And the key passage here is in Psalm chapter 8, where the psalmist in chapter 8 and verse 5 says that God has made man a little lower than the angels, but has crowned him with glory and honor. What does all of that mean? Well, I've given it all to you, and by the way, that all of the handouts have all of these notes on them. So the crown suggests a wreath woven with flowers worn at banquets as a sign of royal authority, honored and elevated. So humans are to be honored and elevated. The exaltation of humans by Yahweh begins as an inward essence. Humans bear the weight, that's what glory means, the weight of God, a show of uniqueness. Human significance begins with the character of Yahweh. A person's worth, value, and dignity has intrinsic, that is internal, beginnings. Majesty is more of an extrinsic display of God, what is put on public display. So what do we put on public display? A good reputation in the sight of God and man, demonstrating the inside-out character conduct key to this verse. And this is what it means for us to literally glorify God, because He is the one who has given us glory. And this is the slide that kind of highlights that idea. Glory means wealth in the Hebraic understanding. So when you tip the scales, as it were, not weighing yourself on the bathroom scale, but weighing your worth, you weight it in terms of the weight of something. That was your kavod, that was your glory. So the essence of what it means to be a person with significance really goes back to somebody like Thomas Aquinas. Now, I think I've mentioned that every week I'll bring forward at least one church history person. This week I'll bring forward a person and a document, but in this case, Thomas Aquinas. Now, I think last week we talked about Augustine and his City of God, and I think in the Penguin version of City of God, it's about 1,100 pages. Well, there are 5 volumes to Summa Theologica. So you better get a big backpack, baby, because it's going to take a lot to carry that thing around. So it's the baseline belief of what it means to be a believer. That was what Thomas Aquinas was addressing. Why did God create us? Isaiah 43:7 says He created us for His glory. Does God need us? No, He is independent and self-sufficient, Acts chapter 17 says. Do humans create their destiny? No, we are here for God's good pleasure, Ephesians 1:11 says. And our purpose is to glorify God, 1 Corinthians 10:31. All of those statements, by the way, aren't necessarily on the slide, but they are in the handouts. But I wouldn't feel right if I didn't emphasize this in a Presbyterian church, specifically in a PCA church. The Westminster Catechism, the very first question in the Westminster Catechism, what is the chief end of man? And the answer is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And once again, there are all kinds of statements throughout the handout that emphasize this. I'm thinking about Psalm 16:11, for instance, that says exactly that our pleasure is found in serving God. So you want to talk about meaning and understanding? Well, you have to go all the way back to 1 Chronicles 29, and this is what 29:11 and 12 say. Yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the victory and the majesty. For all that is in the heavens and in the earth is yours. Yours is the kingdom, O Lord, and you are exalted as head above all. Both riches and honor come from you, and you rule over all. That is what it means to have meaning, because God has given it to us. The essence of what it means to be in the university. This week I was acquainted with a new group and a new song. I showed you Metallica from 1991. Well, here's somebody from 2022. Maybe you know this group, I don't know. Those of you who are younger might. Those of you who listen to country rock might, or nouveau rock. But these guys sing a ballad, and it's a great song. I hope you get a chance to hear it. By the way, all of the examples that I gave today are also in the handout, so you can go back and check all this stuff out. I give you the titles and all of these things. But one of the great questions that they're addressing is in the verbiage there at the bottom. You've always been slightly awkward, kind of weird, upside down and not all here. What's so wrong with me and you is crystal clear. And the answer to the question is, it's a symptom of being human. Now, I'm going to be real honest with you, and I'm going to tell you something about myself so that you don't think that this guy standing in front of you has got it all together. I go through the problem of my own significance all the time. I fight with myself about, does the stuff I do really count for anything? Does my life really matter? Does all the writing I do or all of the teaching I do, is it going to really matter in the end? And I really fight the urge to say, nah, let's just give it up. And I want you to know that if somebody like me is asking these questions and having these discussions with himself when he is 66 years of age, I would suggest to you that all of us, at one point or another, is going to go through the same thing. What does my life count for? You are not always going to find it at the university. And I would emphasize this to the students who are here. I have listed at the bottom in small font my contact information. And if you would like to get together with a small group and have me come and answer questions or have a chat, discuss, whatever, happy to. I would love that. If you have some really good music titles you'd like to pass my way, because I don't always listen to everything you might listen to, I'd love for you to text it to me. By the way, if you text me, please tell me who you are. So, at the end of the day, we come back to this, and you'll notice that I've entered this slide over and over and over again. There's a reason why, by the way, when teachers do this. Repetition to a teacher is the mother of education. We do it because it's important to say again and again and again, kind of like Moses did 5 times at least. What matters? Where do I look? Does my life count? Who decides that? And what am I going to do now about that? Well, I would say to you that everybody asks the question, why am I here? What is my meaning in life? And I would also say, as I've started this morning with that young woman who came to me with that question, I want my life to count for something. And I'm going to tell you what I tell myself all the time. It is a hard truth, but it is a true truth coming from Scripture. Acts 13:36, I don't know how many times I've quoted this to however many people in however many classes. Acts 13:36, Paul is preaching, and he's talking about David, King David, one of the greatest kings of Israel. And he says about King David, when David had served God's purposes for his generation, he died. And I tell myself that all the time. My life is closer to the end than the beginning for some of you. And I emphasize that to myself because I say it to you. You will serve God's purposes for your generation. The great question, of course, will be not only what is the answer to the meaning of life, but what happens after life. And I hope you've got that squared away. And I mentioned the gospel earlier. I think that gospel has an answer to that question. When David had served God's purposes in his generation, that's my meaning. That's my significance. And that is my worth. See you next week.